How do you transform a company into a digital leader? This is something my guest today, Bill Rue, Lendlease's Chief Executive Officer Digital, has done multiple times. Bill is a veteran technology sector leader. He served as GE's digital officer at a time of immense change, leading the transformation of GE into a digital industrial company, doubling revenue from digital products and significantly improving productivity through digital platforms. Prior to that, he was instrumental in the strategy and growth of the Cisco services business through new innovations. With this experience, he's now in Australia leading the digital transformation of Lendlease's global businesses and projects using data, advanced analytics, and new technologies. What are the opportunities and challenges of doing this in a corporate environment? And what have we learnt about how to do corporate digital transformation better? Well, Bill Rue joins me now. Welcome to Smarter Cities.
Thank you very much, Jason. It's really good to be here.
It's going to be fun. I think there's so much going on in the market, in particular with the change in interest rate cycles that are happening right now, and sort of a lot of economic dislocation happening. So having a discussion about how to do things better, I think, is appropriate at this time. So a lot to talk about, but before we get into it, I am fascinated, as you know, of your career and background. We've spent some time together in different countries, and I was really keen to sort of learn a bit about how you ended up doing what you do and what brought you, I guess, into this digital transformation world.
Yeah, I could really look at my career in two phases. The early part of my phase, which started in the 80s, started at IBM. The PC was just coming out, networking was just starting, and so it was really what I would say a focus on technology architecture. In those days, we were moving from a mainframe into this distributed environment, and so I was young in my career, and I got to do a lot of the technology work, thinking through how you build distributed systems, and eventually all that culminated in the internet, generation happening. What happened then, I'd say, is I went into my second phase, and my second phase was as I started moving executive ranks, and this started really with working at Software AG, moving to Cisco. It was about transformation, and the internet opened up this door for transformation. Before that, technology was in the technology realm in the IT departments and maybe a little bit in business. The internet opened up, and I think we all know this idea for it to be business transformative. And I happened to be at the right time in my career to get into transformation. And I think at Cisco, it really came together to me. That's where I wanted to focus, because at the time, John Chambers was leading the company, a fantastic leader, and he was really growing the company. I remember it went from about 19 billion to over 40 billion in revenue, and a lot of it was just expanding the capabilities we have, being number one or number two in every product line, every service line we were offering. And so that ability to see the transformation occurring in the industry really occurred at Cisco, and then that led to being at GE and Lendlease.
But what is it about the sector in your youth that sort of attracted you to it? Is it something you fell into, or is it something you always imagined growing up that that's what you wanted to be doing?
No, it's a interesting story. No, like all things, I probably didn't listen to my father when I was younger, as I should have. And
you and me
but
both.
My father was convinced that there was something in this computer area. He was an engineer, and he was really pushing me to go into computer science. And just the way things worked out, I did end up deciding to do that, and I truly fell in love with it. And I can just remember my first class was Programming Basic, and I thought, this is the coolest thing ever. And of course, went on from there, and it just was the right time, because the early 80s, computer science wasn't that cool thing to be. It was a nerdy thing to be, and I grew up being a bit of a nerd. So when I got into it, it just so happened I was in the right place at the right time, and I could see this was the future. So it's one of the few times, I took my father's advice, and it, as usual, his advice turned out to be spot on.
As fathers have that tendency.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that's the case with me, when my kids grow up,
Yeah.
but we'll see. I think it's fascinating. I remember going, in the 80s, when we had IT classes in primary school, we were on a specialist UK-produced computer called an Acorn.
I
And of
remember
course,
it.
back then, the Acorn was the educational computer,
Yeah.
right? And the internet really was in its sort of early realms. And the idea of open competition in the production of these things was sort of an anathema. The idea that anyone else other than the Acorn was going to be the right computer in a British school was the way to go. These days, of course, it's not the case. So I can see that period of jumping on megatrends as fascinating. So, I'm fascinated then, moving forward a bit into this idea of corporate digital transformation and innovation. You've had a career largely in corporate life, if I'm not mistaken, right? And so, you and I both work in large corporates, and in this particular one, it's a place of great opportunity in a large corporate, but it's also a place of great, I suppose, can be quite difficult to change things. How do you cope with that? How do you do corporate digital transformation in a place that's very good at doing something well now, and you're saying to it, no, actually we need to change?
Yeah, and I think it goes to, I did have a startup in the early 90s, first internet generation, great time, learned a lot, young guy.
Did you do the T-shirts and the and
Yeah,
the
it was-
garage thing?
It was, it was the first generation, so we weren't fully there yet, but I think it was the beginnings of that, that movement. But I think what I saw coming out of that was right at the time the internet was coming in to play, and you could see that retail and telecommunications and media were all foundational, advertising media were foundationally changing. And so it just occurred to me that the future, the interesting work, was going to be the transformation of the giants. And the question was, who was going to win? Was it always going to be the startup, or could giants dance? Could the Goliaths win as opposed to the Davids always? And I felt that, that focus was of interest to me. And I ended up getting an opportunity at Cisco, and I saw Cisco was sort of between, they were a giant, but they still had elements of the, David, Goliath. They had more elements of the David, not just the full Goliath. And I felt, that was a really interesting time to learn. And I think, as I said, John Chambers clearly saw all these industry transformations underway. And coming out of that, I said, that's an interesting problem to solve. Can a big company become a digital leader? And if it doesn't, well, then the Davids will always win. And I think that's the last 20 years has been the most interesting problem to deal with, is how do big companies make the transition in a digital age?
And my sense is that, just speaking generally, big companies really struggle with this process, this whole digital process, or any form of transformation. And there've been lots of MBA type case studies done on Kodak, for example, and the death of Kodak, which failed to change, or other types of companies like this, or VHS versus Beta, which failed to change, and VHS captured the market. Is that your sense as well? Do you think there's a general view that giants are what they are until they're killed due to market forces and something else rises up in its place? Or do you think they can change?
No, I think they can change. I think two books that always, back in the 90s, really juxtaposed my belief system. One was The Innovator's Dilemma, which basically says big companies can't change, and it's still valid today. And it basically says that what you do well makes it really hard to make that foundational change. And the quarter-to-quarter mentality makes it very hard to change. So the internal, DNA will kill any attempt to try to foundationally change. At the same time, Geoffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm, I think, it really had an impact, because it said anybody can do it, including big companies. It's just that there's sort of this model, you have to get across the chasm to do it. And it sort of outlined an approach I thought that could be used by big companies. So I felt that it was hard. And the last thing is, I developed my own philosophy that you're really trading off speed and scale. So a startup has no scale. They have no customers, they're not trusted. They probably don't have enough money, but that's been fixed over the last 20 years. The VC world now gives them enough money. But what they prey upon is speed, right? They're gonna move so fast that you can't keep up with them. And by the way, if you can develop software faster than the other guy, you're probably going to win. On the other hand, big companies have scale. So if you can unlock your scale, your existing customer base, it's so much easier to sell to an existing customer than try to build a new market. If you can unlock the domain knowledge, because domain is becoming more and more important. The industries that are transforming now are much harder to transform because you got to understand how a rail network works, or you got to understand how a shipping network works, or a real estate network works, or the energy, the energy creation and distribution work. If there's a lot of domain knowledge there, so that's scale. So if you in a big company can unlock that scale, you can compete with a startup. And I think that's why it's just harder and harder in the transformation for the industries today. They aren't moving as fast. Property doesn't move as fast because domain knowledge matters. It's a complex environment. You've got to understand how things work. And it's not so much that you can come with a new idea and foist it on because of the complexity in the domain. So I think the speed scale is really the question as to who's going to win in any industry. Is the speed matter more, or can scale win the day?
And that's the thing, isn't it? I always look at large corporates as the scale is an opportunity to create new things, and that's why I work in corporate development. In fact, when I joined your team early on, you made us read a book called Unscaled, if you remember that book.
Yes, I do.
And that particular book was interesting because it sort of put forward the thesis that actually to create new things, rather than trying to create everything internally, you should rent resources from other parties and joint venture. I use the term joint venture because I work in property, to create that new thing, right? And I think there's some validity to that. What are your thoughts on that idea around the ecosystem of Unscaled?
Yeah, I think that a lot has been written about ecosystems the last 20 years, and I think that this is the one piece that both startups and big companies fail to master, right? Is that both end up having to do too much themselves. I think what helped the startups was that they realized that with the cloud coming out, they could move faster, right? That was the unscaling. The cloud came, it unscaled that I didn't have to go out and spend months buying compute and storage and network. I just rented it. I think that we're seeing that now with the software capabilities that exist in the cloud, because that is enable people to layer on top of and unscale themselves. They have less to do below sort of the waterline than ever before. And that waterline continues to move up. In other words, the software capabilities are becoming such that anybody is unscaled, including big companies. So I think the idea that you figure out who your partners are going to be, that you figure out what your mode is, what your domain knowledge is, and then everything else you find partners to go help you deliver. That's what this unscaling is all about. The problem is these partnerships are hard, right? And the second thing about a partnership is, the making sure it truly both parties have a win-win out of it. And so you can set up your ecosystem and get partners, but sometimes it's unbalanced relationship. So getting balanced relationships is important, I think, as well. The last thing is not everybody wants to partner. So you may have someone you want to partner with, but they're already a giant, so they can sort of dictate terms. So I think its ecosystem is probably the hardest thing to master. You can master the technology. You can go get all the compute, all the software and everything, but mastering creating that ecosystem and putting it in place, it's much more complex than people realize. However, when you master that, when you figure out that, and you get your model right around your ecosystem, that becomes a moat that is oftentimes very hard to beat.
It sort of really resonated with me when we were having this discussion around partnerships in the sort of software space or the technology space, because in property and infrastructure, this is exactly how we do business, right? So, in property, particularly, with social infrastructure, public-private partnerships are an example of this, right? The government effectively says, I have this particular need. We build a consortium of partners who all want to deliver that need. We deliver a particular product, whether it be a convention center or a hospital or whatever else, and the government then rents it. That is exactly the sort of, I guess, an analogy of unscaled. And same in property, we find joint venture partners in capital or other development partners to come and
Exactly
do things.
creating your ecosystem, isn't it?
Absolutely. And at Lendlease, because we have several regions and we operate in very different cultural environments, that the nexus of those partnerships can actually scale, to use the term again, across boundaries, across international capital, international developers, right? So I think there was a very comfortable feeling with this idea that, of the unscaled idea in the technology space, right? Are partnerships harder in technology than they are in property, do you think?
No, I don't think, in general, I think partnerships are relationships. Let's start with relation. To get a good partnership, you've got to have a relationship. The closer that relationship is, call it personally or professionally, the easier it is. When people know you and trust you and you've already done work with them, you're more likely to move that partnership ahead. And I think that trust probably plays as much in capital raising as it does in tech partnerships. So I think that's really what makes Silicon Valley work in many ways, is that everybody knows everybody. And the relationships, they aren't always great, by the way. There are people that never going to partner together. But the fact is, what you see in Silicon Valley is that people tend to come together pretty quickly because those relationships are very tight. And that's why Silicon Valley has not been easily duplicated anywhere else in the world, because I think people underestimate that having 50 or 100 or 500 startups isn't what makes the Silicon Valley. It's those relationships, the ability to come together to deal with the unscaling, to get your capital and your technology and your go-to-market aligned much more quicker than you could otherwise. I mean, you can't do that anyplace else. Arguably, you can do it a little more in Seattle these days, but once you leave Silicon Valley, Seattle, it dissipates quite a bit. There's, the rest of them become dwarves because they just don't have that sheer volume of relationship, technology, unscaling capability, and the trust, because I used to work there and I know this person, and I think people underestimate that. Now, I think that, again, there's a few additional areas, but everybody wants to have an innovation hub. Well, I think it's so much about getting the tech there, they forget.
Yeah.
But what really is all about is those relationships. And by the way, I think the other thing is, it's not just having tech. You got to have certainly technology relationships, but go to market, and you need capital relationships and mentoring relationships. And it's a lot of things coming together, not just, a bunch of startups in the same place.
I think that's so true. The whole innovation district conversation really does miss that element of it, which is people-to-people contact. And I was determined not to really talk about COVID on this podcast today, but I'm going to, because do you think that COVID pulling us apart, putting us online, has impacted that building of relationships? And I ask this question because coming from a background now of basically being the guy who helps drive relationships and build partnerships, I just don't see how you can do that and create new relationships online.
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag. I think on one hand, let me say, I think we've all seen this. Like, you're working at home, you get up in the morning, you start earlier because you don't have the commute. I got more calls in every day, and not like phone calls, but that video interactive chatting session that was so productive that I reconnected with people who I used to wait, I'll be in New York, let's get together.
But you knew them already.
I knew them already.
Yeah.
You're right. and so for the existing relationships, it was fantastic. Um, Now I did find, however, now that I'm traveling and going back and seeing my teams in various locations and meeting people live, the new connections are only possible through that physical contact, I really believe. And the second part of that is when you when you when you don't get to see your people and interact with them physically, there is something missing because it's more of a transactional dialogue rather than a creative relationship building dialogue. And I think so. There's no doubt that we're not going back to the old sit at your desk way, but we're going to have to get to that balanced interaction. And I think this goes back to the workplace of the future is not going to look anything like the workplace of the past. And I think, we're already starting to see by the data that when people are coming in, there's more than one persona. It used to be one persona. Literally, you came to work and that was that. Yeah. But we got new personas, and I think we're going to have to adapt to that. But I think there's no way that a full virtual experience is the future. I think it's got to be that combination.
I agree. Well, you and I were never at our desks anyway when we were here, so it seems to. And I definitely want to get back to a lot of the workplace stuff because I think that's fascinating what's happening there. But before we get there, I'm really interested in your time at GE because GE is a transformative company. Yeah. You worked there when Jeffrey Immelt was the CEO, and he had quite I guess, an ambitious vision for GE, and you were there at a time of immense change. So tell us a little bit about that. If I'm not mistaken, Immelt used to talk about the fact that GE should only be one or two, and if not any of those things, they should exit the market. Yeah. And that was quite a different view on things, whereas most people think, hey, being third is not too bad. We're making money, it's profitable. Why would you exit the market? What was it like?
Yeah, it even actually that goes back to Jack Welch. I think Jack, over his tenure, really put his mark on the world, and there was a lot of things that I wasn't there during his time, but you could see it still existed when I got there. You had to be number one or number two, and I think that forces, by the way, you to really think through. Are you good enough? It's not, and what does it take to really win? Winner's mentality. What investments do you need to make? So I think it forced leaders to rethink things. I think, it focuses your mind. I also think that their leadership development was well deserved. The leadership at General Electric was by far, the best people in the world, and it deserved its reputation for that. I think that Jeff came in, and I worked for him, and I've got tremendous respect for Jeff, and I really enjoyed working underneath him. Brilliant guy.
Did you join as Chief Digital Officer, or were you there for a bit before that?
No, I joined to help to start the digital effort, and originally, that was they put me in the research group under the Chief Technology Officer for the company, which was awesome, and we began to incubate what did we want to do, because there wasn't a model. Today there's, the consultants will come in and sell you a model. You got to remember, in those days there was no model. There wasn't even the title Chief Digital Officer was actually utilized in some instances for marketing, not for what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
And so we were inventing this idea of digitization and transformation of an industry. We literally were inventing just about everything, and so we went through that. And I have to say, the company, we tried many things. Some things didn't work. One area that I wish we had done differently, but you learn is it was the early 2010s, and there wasn't a clarity around AWS and GCP and Azure weren't really even much of a cloud capability, and so you had debate going on. Should you build your own cloud or should you utilize somebody else's? And I remember Facebook was creating a group like Open Compute or something. I can't remember the name of it, but it was basically the idea that there would be an open environment for creating the cloud capability that you could just use that open environment, create your own cloud, which made a ton of sense at the time, but it turned out as we know today, it wasn't the right way to go. So we probably spent a couple of years trying to create our own cloud and believing we could do it at a cost that was attractive, but the reality was we couldn't. And so we eventually had to go on to the cloud, and that changed our architecture a little bit. So you always, I would say in the early days of this, we were, trying to figure out where the world was going to go on cloud. It was murky, right? It was quite murky at the
But
time.
how would you do it? I mean, there was no evidence base. A traditional model would say, here's the evidence base, here's the trend. On this basis, we're going to construct this hypothesis and we're going to test it.
Look, I think there was that's, the problem when you're, I think it was when I was at Cisco, maybe it was John Chambers. I think I maybe once heard, being too early is just as bad as being late, right? And so unfortunately, we were early on this. We were having to invent a lot of things as we went along, and I think, and it's hard lifting, right, to go figure this out. So if you're going to be first, you're going to make some mistakes. But where we didn't make mistakes, I think, was we realized that data and analytics were going to be the center point of value creation for the industrial world. And that underneath that would be an IoT fabric, data coming from all these machines, and that the value was going to be able to predict how your business operated in a variety of ways based on that data. So can I predict that a part's going to fail before it fails? Because when a part fails on a plane,
It's problematic.
The plane gets delayed. And if you can fix things in scheduled downtime, well, your business becomes extraordinarily efficient. Can I predict how fuel is being used in a jet airplane, and can I optimize it? That's true of any industry. So can I optimize the resources that get used? Can I predict failures before they occur? Can I optimize my workforce? That's the future of where all this goes. And I think that, we were inventing that as we went along, and you had to put a fabric in place that allowed you to collect that data and create these kinds of algorithms, distribute it, and start to build out capability for your services teams and your product teams to utilize. And I think that, in the early days, that wasn't as clear, right? But today, that part, no doubt, every industrial firm in the world is trying to figure that out. We just happened to do it 10 years, before everybody else was even thinking about it. Now, that strategy is embedded into every industrial company in the world, trying to figure out how they do it to drive better products.
And so you're there, you're inventing this, you're in a large, highly successful organization. You've talked a little bit about leadership, which I think we should come back to because it's important. Was there an allergic reaction to what you were trying to do? Or were people there going, you know what, Bill, that's amazing, we're going to disrupt our business, I'm all for it?
I think it was, a mixed bag. I think that, first of all, as I said before, General Electric people are very smart, very, very smart. And that's true of a lot of companies out there. But they had certainly their fair share. And so I don't think anybody said, oh, it's terrible to use data and analytics. In fact, most of these people were doing things like that. I think that all of them wanted to do it. I think there was a number of issues that we hadn't quite worked through that, I wish we'd worked through a little faster. One was, there's always, in GE, a lot of it was, well, if you develop this technology, where's the revenue flow to, right? To the business, traditional business, to the new business. And it was a very, I'd say, healthy argument and discussion.
It's a perennial debate in a corporate. Who gets the cash?
And by the way, that's a positive thing. So they weren't fighting it at all.
Yeah.
They were saying, hey, bring it on, but
I want the cash.
I want, who gets the benefit? And I think that was a very positive debate. And quite honestly, you want the businesses to succeed. And the vast majority of real revenues in digital were in the businesses. There was no doubt that each business had a lot of growth in their digital capabilities. I think the real debate was on a common platform. Was a common platform for the company for that digital capability going to be necessary? And I think there was just a little too much, let's say at the technology level, debate about how to go about that. And the second thing is we were solving a really hard problem, trying to create a massive infrastructure to allow this kind of approach. And that's what I said. You make a misstep like, okay, we're going to build our own data center or a cloud data center, and it can put you back when you realize that probably wasn't a feasible approach. But I would say that the businesses were genuinely at the leading edge of adopting this, of pushing it, of bringing it on board, of creating capability. And even today, I think you can still look at GE and realize that digitally, their products and services are well advanced across the board. The other thing is GE Digital does exist today and continues to build, I would say, outstanding digital products, and I think they've done a really good job.
What's really interesting, reflecting on what you've just said, is this concept of the problem. So I think in looking at technology companies generally, and a lot of corporates actually, there's often a, I guess, vision or view of a product first and then customer second, or product first and problem second. We'll invent this and then it will solve a problem, but we're not sure what that problem might be. Whereas realistically, traditionally, when you look at things, it should be, what is the problem? Now, how do I solve it? Is that your sense?
Yeah, I think there's a few, let's call them luminaries, visionaries, creating startups in the world, and that's the Steve Jobs and the Elon Musks, and they can afford to just blow up the way people think, right? I think it's the one thing I've learned over doing this at Software AG and Cisco and GE and Lendlease is you have to do two things. One is you can't blow up the industry from a big company. I think that's the one thing only a startup can do. However, you don't need to blow up the industry to win. And I think the idea that you can do, let's say, major shifts are important. And you've got to stay customer focused, because remember, your only leverage is scale. If you're going to blow up the industry and you're blowing up yourself, boy, that becomes really hard. Yeah. I think, you go back to your Kodak example, the idea there would have been Kodak could have had a digital photography business and pushed that simultaneously. They did push it. One could say, I had a Kodak digital, camera, but they didn't push it as hard as they did that they could have. I think you can run both. You just have to provide a balanced approach to the new stuff winning simultaneously while you're supporting the old. And you've got to get everybody to believe that both of them are critically important. That's the DNA part, is everybody realizes they got to do that. And I think that Kodak never made that shift. I think GE was making that shift, and people recognized their business trends had to incorporate digital. I think that if you're in a big company, though, you're not. You've got to figure out how to incrementally deliver to your scale, and even your customers aren't ready for this foundational change. And I think you're not going to be given the runway if it's 10 years before the industry accepts it. So why not have the 10-year view, but incrementalize your way into it? And I think people struggle with that because they want to be the Steve Jobs of this industry and make that happen and do it in a big company. And there's just not a lot of good examples of that happening. There's examples certainly like what Elon Musk has done. With that said, I think big companies have to be able to to focus on the customer, make sure that they put that digital group in play and they wrap it warmly and don't let it get consumed by the old business like Kodak did, so that they get pushed down. They've got to make sure they get it on an on-ramp to success without thinking it has to be a big, startup IPO in 3 years. That's not valid. Work yourself into a 10-year plan, always realizing you want to get to the big vision, and have yourself open to deal with the transformation that's coming, and allow yourself to work into it while you leverage your scale. That's what a big company can do, and those who do that are successful.
That's so true. I mean, I like your point there around the fact that people think of startups as young, fresh, agile, fast IPO, 38 times, no money later on, right? That I just don't think that's a realistic proposition within a corporate. I mean, one reflection I do have is corporates have a number of models of doing that. I think of the Qantas Jetstar example here, where Qantas, full service airline, could see a market segment that would travel if the cost structure was different for them, and so they created a whole new different business unit, Jetstar, different CEO, different industrial arrangements, different product offering, and it worked, right? And of course, this is not they weren't unique in this. The airline industry did it, across the board. I think the U.S.'s Southwest, was only serving peanuts at one point, if I'm not mistaken.
They had pretzels now.
Pretzels, there you go. They've got pretzels now. There you go. And mind you, anyone traveling on a plane right now is probably not interested in eating anything. They just want to get there.
Yeah,
seems to be the challenge. Let's go to Lendlease. We've been here a few years now. After your career at GE, what attracted you to Australia? What is it about our country in this, in this market that's interesting to you?
Well, truthfully, I was attracted to Lendlease, which is a great Australian firm that operates in a global way, right? In fact, it's probably true. It's a global company now, headquartered in Australia.
It's true.
So I think I was attracted to what is a great company that is innovative and is willing to, be at the leading edge and take risks, not just digitally, but in general. I think that was the most attractive thing. In order to do that, I mean, they clearly wanted me to move to Australia. And look, it's what I liked about coming to Australia was it was a fabulous country. I'd been traveling here on business 20 years, so I knew a little bit about it. But it's one of those places that it's easy to come to, but you come into an environment that's just different than any place else in the world. Meaning that it's a big country with a small but vibrant population. Everybody lives on the coasts. It's obviously the environment is just different, right? The animals, the vegetation, and so it's a little bit of coming to see a place that everybody dreams about coming. I mean, there's anybody who's doing their little kids say, "I want to go to Australia." Nobody knows why, but it's just so different, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is living that dream. I think the other thing is there's such a strong relationship between Australia and the U.S. It's so easy as an American. It's a warm country. It's a welcoming country. There's a lot of great restaurants, great places to be, and lastly, at the end of the day, great people. All the other stuff doesn't matter. When you come here, people are genuinely just nice, friendly, and welcoming in a way that a lot of countries just aren't. And Australians are the best traveled people in the world. That's probably why they're so welcoming to people from every place else, because they've been every place else. They are very worldly here. People, I think, if one thing people don't realize about Australians, most worldly people probably in many ways, because they've been everywhere. They've seen everything. So, it's been a great experience for me personally, not just professionally. So I came for Lendlease professionally. Personally, I came here just to experience the wonders of Australia.
Well, that's it's true. I mean, I agree with you. There is a great sense of adventurism here in Australians. I'm a migrant as well, as well, and that is, you can't help but be attracted to it. Do you find the market here? You talked a bit about Silicon Valley. You talked a bit about about America. How do we compare as a market? Can you compare? Are we innovative in our own way, or is there a difference?
No, I think there's a huge difference. And being in tech, and speaking frankly with everyone, I mean, when you're in tech and you're in a startup, your first market, if you're in the U.S., is probably focused on the U.S., on North America. If you're a startup in Europe, it's probably Europe. And then you probably go to Europe or the U.S. next. I think Asia has been up and rising, and you see the same thing in Asia. It's Asia first, and then probably North America, probably Europe, and that becomes the big three. I think that that there are just a couple of regions around the world, and a good example is Australia, the Middle East. There's good business in these places, but they're second tier to where you come if you're creating a company and going after a market. So I think it just struggles. The one thing is Australia struggles from being, a smaller market that you'll get to eventually, but you're not getting to first. Unless what Australia is doing. Mining is a good example. You might go to Australia first or second if you're in mining, right? Because they're so strong here. It is strong in construction and real estate, right? I mean, it punches above its weight for sure. So being in real estate, that's why I was interested in coming here, because I felt that Lendlease has the ability in Australia to really make a difference, but the ability to take it out globally as well. So I think that it struggles from being a smaller market, and people usually come here second, right? Second tier. But it's not the only one. There's a lot of places. There are other places like this. And I think the last thing I would just say, however, is that it's easy in some ways to do business here, because if you get into if you got genuinely 5 cities, if you can do business in 5 cities here, you can do really well, right? And so you aim at the good news is when you're in Sydney or Melbourne, there's such a density of capability, and I think people miss the attractiveness of the density of you can get to 5 cities and you can really make a difference here. That's one thing I've seen that makes it an interesting market.
That's a very interesting perspective. I mean, from an Australian point, I think we look at the world as an opportunity to create business for Australia. So really, as you say, we're a small market. We're never going to be able to dominate ourselves. Right? We're not going to be able to sell only to our own market. And this company is a great example. Having developed strong real estate capability, strong construction capability, it then looked further ashore. Again, that sense of adventurism has sort of come in. So now 14 cities, a lot of Australians in our businesses overseas. There's a sort of talent factory here for real estate in Lendlease that I think is sort of now being exported overseas and to other companies. I might add several of our former senior executive colleagues are now running other companies and talk fondly of their time here. So I think that's good. Just into the corporate a bit more. So one of the conversations I've always been interested in with you has been, because in addition to your digital role as Chief Digital Officer, you also look at corporate IT.
Yeah.
And those of us who suffer corporate overheads and are used to them and worry about them, always look at IT as part of that.
Yeah.
But you have a different vision of IT, really. I remember having a conversation about IT actually being something that adds value, is accretive to a business, that is a corporate weapon. How does that view manifest in a corporation? How do you change the culture of an IT department?
Until I went to GE, I never really, never worked in or was part of or led a IT department. That wasn't my career choice. I was product, service, customer-facing, technology. And but what I discovered at GE, going back to lessons learned, is that you're trying to go on this digital journey. If you don't somehow bring the IT group along, 2 things happen. One, is you have haves and have-nots, right? Because the IT department, oh yeah, you do this stuff, you know, you don't get the exciting stuff, you get the less exciting stuff. But quite honestly, they think of every day about driving that more exciting stuff, and it's not separable. The second thing is that if you're not careful, they can compete with your digital activities, and that's not good. And I discovered that at GE, that you really have to think about a total digital experience in a company that starts from your IT organization and goes up, that they're not separable. And if you're not careful, you're not going to get enough out of it. You're going to duplicate, because you'll have digital guys building infrastructure that the IT guys already have, or you got the IT guys saying, okay, well, we can build that application just as well, but we'll do it differently. And that creates, I think, a bad dynamic in a company. So the ability to bring it together, if you're really going to be a digital company, you have to make sure these things are working in tandem. And there's more than one way to do it. But you know, when I came into Lendlease, I said, look, I really want call it technology assets underneath me, and we've really come a long way. So, and the way I look at it is, there's a 3-horizon model that's been used. I think it might be McKinsey who came up with the 3-horizon model, but I don't actually remember. But the 3-horizon model it's not a timeline. It says every company needs to have activities in 3 horizons. Horizon 1 is direct near-term value. So this is a big chunk of your IT department. Every day they got to make sure the network runs, the PCs are there, the applications run, right? Everything they do, the value creation is immediate, because you got to run your business on it, right? But you've got to invest in that, because the future of that isn't the old way, your data centers and the way we've done things forever. It's going to be this new cloud architecture, et cetera. So it doesn't mean you don't invest. So, you know, first I came here and said, all right, I love the idea that we're going to rethink Horizon 1 architecture. We're going to modernize it. We're going to zero baseline it, and we're really going to set a standard that says 100% cloud, get the cost aligned to the value, and allow our people to work at a higher level in there. And so essentially we're taking that unscaled approach to that IT, and I love that idea. The second horizon, again, you're doing it today, is initiatives. They won't have value for 12 to 18 to 24 months. These are initiatives that have to ride on your Horizon 1 infrastructure, but you're really not going to see the value until it gets done. This is a new payroll system, or a new front-end customer-facing application. You know, a little less risky in the sense you know what you got to get done. Takes a little while to get value. You're investing in it. When it's done, it probably moves into a Horizon 1 activity. And so for the first time ever, we have complete control of over all of our initiatives in the company, and a way to evaluate those with the businesses in a way I don't think anybody's really done as well before.
And it's very efficient now in terms of how new projects are considered, new initiatives are considered, and how they're funded.
It is, and I think that I find it actually quite enjoyable to have these discussions, the debates, you're essentially getting rid of a lot of the shadow IT, which I think every organization wants to do. And it doesn't mean the businesses don't control their own destiny and they decide what they want. This has to be business-led, business-justified, but you just need to make sure it's implemented, efficiently. The third horizon is things that are higher risk, and probably the value isn't 30 till 36 months, 48 months out. And this is where people call it digital, but all of it is digital, quite honestly. But it's just that this is more of that transformative digital. So you've got Horizon 1, deliver now, transition yourself to that full unscaled cloud environment. Horizon 2 is the flow of what kind of capabilities do you need to be a modern business. And Horizon 3 is what digital do you want to invest in that is a little farther out, that has much more risk, but if you win that battle, you'll be at the early stages of innovation. And so for us, that is what we have called our podium activities.
And that's a great segue into Podium, Bill, because that Horizon 3, I think, has been what has excited Lendlease. It's the opportunity of transforming the way we approach our construction sector, the way we approach real estate. You know, I think one of the great realizations is that while the world has changed and innovated and costs have come down in many areas, construction still seems to be one of these areas that hasn't really transformed that much. It has transformed a lot in many areas, but not overall in cost structure. And the same, I think, generally for for real estate. And you've been quite passionate about the sector, visualizing how you can develop a building, for example, and using digital twin, for example, as an example of that, right? So this is our opportunity really on Horizon 3 around Podium. What's your view of Podium? Like, what, you've got a couple of products that are now ready to come to market.
Yeah.
What are they going to do for us?
Yeah, we when I got here 3.5 years ago, there was a real vision around the change that was going to happen in the industry, and there's a lot of a lot of buzzwords that people throw out: design for manufacturing, the idea of digital twins and generative design, and I think autonomous buildings, and I think we really did establish that vision for where the world's going to go. But that vision is 10 years out, and our industry moves extraordinarily slow, so that makes it really, really hard. And I think as you know, the road is littered with startups, well-funded startups who have tried this and just face planted, right?
Run out of steam.
Yeah,
right.
I think one thing I've learned over the last 3 years is and this gets back to the domain knowledge, the complexity of the business of putting together a development and then operating that development is much higher than everybody realizes. And so, everything sounds good on a piece of paper like DFMA and generative design, but how that technology is actually going to get utilized, who's the customer, and this is the real problem. The person who gets the value and the person who's the customer, some of this stuff isn't the same. And that's when it's a difficult place. So we love the vision. We've really worked on all aspects of that vision, but what's come back is, okay, we're getting to that point where we need to focus. And the two areas that we've decided to focus on is, the first is this idea of how we provide what actually the government of Singapore has created, this idea of an integrated design and delivery platform. And that's essentially, we share that vision, which is, how do you have a platform from the developer through working with all the architects and engineers to ending up with a design that you can construct. So the construction world has BIM. BIM is their ERP, right? The development world doesn't have their version of an ERP. That's what this is. It essentially is the ERP for the world of development. But it turns out that world's complicated. You've got a lot of people all working together to come up with a design, and we all know the design always doesn't quite fit right. It's not designed for manufacturability. There's generative design tools, but they don't work together in tandem. So for us, it's really the idea of a podium for development. We see this idea of a ERP for the development community, where they can all collaborate and work together, where they have the ability to have their generative design tools, whether they buy them or whether they have their own, or whether they use what ours.
They can bolt into the system.
That's right. An open environment for generative design, an open environment for DFMA, an open environment that allow it to work and feed into BIM to allow the BIM process in the construction to take place. But that idea of really creating that development ERP, and I don't necessarily like that word ERP, but I think it's easy to understand, is what we're trying to do.
But you're saying that Podium for development works with BIM. It's not looking to replace BIM.
No, I think the original vision was, you could replace BIM, but of course we've learned a lot. And the fact is, no, it's not trying to replace BIM at all. In fact, It's not trying to replace products like Revit. You'll have design tools, and those design tools will produce designs, and we want to bring that in. What we want is the ability for all design to come together, no matter what tool you're using, and then you can create a fully integrated digital twin. You still want to get to a digital twin.
Absolutely.
That's where the platform is. It's allowing you to get to that digital twin by pulling all this together. It also allows you to begin to look for making sure you rationalize how these things work together. I think so for us, one product in Podium is Podium for Development. Not getting rid of BIM, not getting rid of design tools, integrating things together, but that collaboration platform. The second is what we call Podium Property Insights. Now that I've got a building or a development, we want to begin to think about how people use that better. There's a lot of tools to figure out how to make the building more optimal. That's not the interesting thing. We want to look at how the workplace works better. So how does as an employee make sure the workspace is productive for them, is sustainable for them, is healthy for them, that they like it? Because I think the future of the workplace is going to be agile. So we've really put the person at the center point, whether it's the person for workplace and understanding how they work in the workplace, and then looking at best practices to make the workplace more useful for this new worker of the future. Or think of retail. I look at the customer and say, how do you begin to understand the behaviors of customers in your retail setting? And what do you do to make that retail setting more attractive? So you want to make the workspace more attractive, the workplace more attractive to the employee, the retail setting more attractive to the customer. And it's not a surveillance system. We don't care who individuals are. In fact, we don't want to know who individuals are. What we want to do is create positive environments in physical spaces that respond to real data and understanding of the behaviors of people in there, and allow those people to in fact influence it to get the spaces that are even better.
I could then use that data to say, okay, if I really want my building to attract the most revenue possible, I need the best companies. These companies need to make sure their workforces are happy. If those things don't happen, I don't get my building occupancy up, or I don't get my retail center working properly. So is the customer the employee in this case, or is the customer the building owner?
Look, I think,
or is it the company?
It's the company.
It's
really the company. I think in the future, the owner of the building was probably, should be offering this as part of what makes their building great. We give you the capability to make sure your workspace is productive for you, your employee.
Because
right?
It's a retention question now, isn't it?
It is.
Right.
But I think that our real first customer on the workplace is the companies. So if you're a company and you have 50 locations, you want to make sure every one of those locations is purpose-built for those employees. And I'll give a good example. In our early stages of understanding, these new personas, we've discovered there's a persona now called the event attender, or that's at least what we call it. The event attender is someone who comes in every week, but when they come in on average a day and a half, and they come in on average about 2 hours. So in other words, they come in for a very specific event, and then they leave. And they like to come in for that event, and they interact. But once the event's done, they're not productive working in that office. So I think what we're seeing is that before you might have had one persona. I'm going to mandate everybody returns to the office. We have one persona. You're in the office 3 days a week. I think the reality is what we're seeing is that there are more personas. You need to understand your persona. And then you've got to decide, are you productive with those personas? And if you aren't, what do you want to do to entice the changes that are necessary? So I think it's up to companies to figure out, what does the new worker want? Are the people who are event attenders productive? And if they are, maybe you're okay with that, in which case the kind of style of space you have is more set up for the new offsite, maybe an onsite, right, kind of thing. So I think that these are the things we're working through to help people understand how to make their workspace more productive for the future, and get rid of space that's not productive, but at the same time, when people come in the office, make sure they dearly love being there and that you're getting everything out of that employee. And the only way you're going to do that is understanding what they want, what are their behaviors, and then giving them what they want.
Do you think it applies to a residential precinct as well at some point? I mean, we're looking at office buildings at the moment, and that's an incredible thing.
Yeah.
But surely in designing residential communities, this sort of data would be important.
Yeah, you know, this is where our domain knowledge at the company at Lendlease is so important, is that when you think about what I said, what we discovered, the same algorithm to look at behavior of employees in space, we just think of it as behavior of people in space. So the same algorithms work in retail. The same algorithms can work at a sporting venue, a fan. The same algorithms, quite honestly, could work for a patient or a nurse. Is your layout as productive? Is the way you're working as productive? Are they happy? And do they have better ideas than you do about how to make it more productive? But if you think about it, it's exactly the same for a precinct. How do the residents feel about that precinct, and how do you make that precinct more attractive? Because the more attractive it is, the more those home values are going to go up over other areas that aren't as attractive.
And
so
more of a community forms as the community
Now,
changes.
remember what I said before. The one thing is we've eliminated any surveillance. I don't want to know who you are. I want to know behaviors and look for personas, but not know who any individual is. And I think that's going to be the future, is that we decide that, you know, this is not a security system. This is intended to say, how do we make physical space more attractive and better for the people who use it? And I don't care whether that's an office, a retail setting, a stadium, a hospital, or a residential area. Once you start to do that, you start to change the nature. You invest in things that the people want based on the behaviors and what the data is telling you.
The place then becomes responsive. You know, it's fascinating because, of course, you know, as a developer, we put so much effort into researching a precinct. You know, we will do market research, we will do surveys, we will do all that, and even then, even though, you know, we create some incredible places, you could argue that, you know, maybe they're not as precise as they could be, and you change them over. You know, this whole conversation has been about how you digitally transform the way you work, or how you digitally transform, you know, a company. This is a prime example of that, is it not? Is it not the evolution of how that?
And the way I think about it is that we're moving into a new future of agile, which is we need to think of our physical space as being agile physical spaces. And what do I mean by that? Is the idea that you still do everything we do today. We're really great at it. You know, you create it. But as you know, people are pesky. They'll say they want one thing. When they get it, they go, I don't really want that. And then you find out.
Human beings are complicated.
And what we need is this idea of agility, and I'll use the workspace. You know, build it, and then have the ability to try new things, test it out, find things that work, roll it out. Today, you know, we sort of do a workspace analysis, usually with consultants and clipboards and this and that, probably every few years, if that. And, you know, that's not agile. You really want to be changing things as on the fly as you go. Test a little, implement a little, learn, continually evolve. I think that's true of the retail setting, the residential setting. We're going to have to be agile in everything we do going forward. Nothing is static anymore. And the thing that people don't like is the static. I got this fixed desk. It's bolted to the floor. I'm going to sit there every day and stare at my teams. Those days are gone, because you can mandate to come back and do that, but people are going to align themselves to their most productive being. So how do you then say, okay, I want to make them productive. I want to learn. And when I learn something, I'll try something. I won't change out every floor. Let me try out a quarter of a floor. And if that works better, let's roll it out. I think that idea of agility and recognizing that data will drive our decision making, and we're going to have better employees, happier employees, healthier employees. Same thing is true with the customer, happier shoppers. That's the future, and it goes to every physical space. What I like being a Lendlease, we have so much domain knowledge that is going into these algorithms. It just makes us, it's hard to compete with that, right?
Well, yes. I mean, and I think what's even more interesting is our customers, particularly in our office buildings, are facing a period of time when the workforce is asking for them to change. And so, so many of our tenants, I've spoken to them at senior levels, they're worried about their young workforce who started growing up during COVID. They're quite used to digital online work, and they don't, they want the different things that satisfy them.
Yeah.
And how do an employee survey isn't going to give you that data, right? I'm going to pump out a survey, tell me how I'm doing, we all do it. That used to be enough. And I'm not sure that they feel that that's enough now. So the things like Podium Property Insights are critical, I think, in us being able to help them
Absolutely,
with their workforces.
absolutely. I think you're spot on. So when I think about Podium, we've got one case we're aiming at the developer, the architect, the engineer, the design consultants, the suppliers, all working together on the design, using analytics and data in collaborating in new ways that brings together what they do today, but brings it together into a holistic approach to getting that digital twin. So everybody plays their part, but all comes together. And in the end, the developer then has that end product, push that out to BIM, and automate more and take that forward. And then once you've got these great places, how do you put the person at the center in whatever the space is, and allow that space to continue to evolve to be the most attractive physical space in the world? And then, by the way, all that data comes back into every new design that we start with to say, hey, we just learned these 5 facts.
It's a virtuous circle.
It is a virtuous circle.
It goes back to that whole unscaled ecosystem that we were talking about. Fascinating. We'll have to end soon. It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation. But I'm going to leave the last word to you. If I was to ask you, as a company, as a country, as a world, 3 things that you would love to see that we could be doing better in this space. Back to this idea of scale and corporates being able to digitally transform. With all your experience, what would they be?
I think that the first thing I think that's important around all this is that we have to figure out how to create what other industries have, an ecosystem that allows everybody to still do the work they're doing today, but participate together digitally. I think the really, it goes back to what I said, Podium for Development. The hard part is getting people to collaborate and work together. Today, we're still sending files around and even physical documents, in a way that is so disconnected.
I printed something off today.
I really believe that, and by the way, I really believe that while we're at the lower end of adoption in our community, in our industry, I'm finding the people working on all this, everybody agrees there's got to be a better way. I think the thing we've got to do is make sure that everybody can play their part and win, and that we're not trying to get rid of to totally upend the industry, because I don't think that's possible. It's just we've got a complex problem we're always solving. How do we simplify how we all work together? So the first thing is how do you make sure you're coming into an ecosystem? Love to see people joining our ecosystem and being a part of it. Hopefully we can create something where that openness and ecosystem play, I think. And so the first thing is moving away from what I'd call the full proprietary closed approach, and realizing that other industries have gotten to an open approach have won. So I'd love to see us as community realize that an open approach here can really win and all boats can rise. I think the second thing is that I'd love to see this idea where we bring the suppliers, and we all talk about DFMA, but I really love to see where the suppliers and the design are working a lot closer. I think the distance between the suppliers and design is a huge chasm. And as a result, the design makes a lot of assumptions, and by the time you get to the suppliers, you find that the cost is out of balance because you didn't realize the choice you made upstream, downstream wasn't right. How do we bring and collapse the relationship between the supplier and the developer and the designers and the consultants, so that the more we do that, I think decision making, everybody wants to make the right decision in this industry, I've discovered. They can't because there's a lack of knowledge about something, so they have to fill it in with assumptions. How do we make it easier for that knowledge base to really allow us to do what the semiconductor world did 30 years ago in their complex designs? And I really think that this is the second thing, bring the suppliers closer into the design process, I think will lead to less heartache downstream. You know, I think the last thing is that we've got to make sure that we have some idea about data and data governance and data ownership that is very positive coming out of this. Meaning, you know, I still see a lot of people, you know, using video and other IoT devices more for surveillance, you know, about the individual. And I don't think that's going to fly. And I think we need to realize that we're going to have in every place we have more video, more sensors, more capability. But we probably need to make sure that we think about that in the sense that our goal isn't to, you know, necessarily know you as an individual, unless you are part of a program where you opt in. In other words, everybody get full choice. We've got to really think about how we utilize this data in an ethical way going forward, because if we do, we're going to design better places. We're going to make ourselves more agile. So I really think that, you know, again, this is the community coming together and realizing that there's a lot of data in our environments. If we all figure out how to operate more effectively with the data, we're going to be better off. If we are careful about how we use it and respect privacy of individuals, we're going to win. And we're going to go from being last to first, I think, if we think about those three things in the future, that we will be the best data-driven, automated industry on the planet if we're willing to work together in those ways. It takes a village.
Well, Bill, one of the things I enjoy working with you is the fact that you have this forward view and thinking around these things. And I think it's a really interesting and challenging opportunity ahead. So I wish you all the very best with these initiatives. We're right behind you. Bill Rue, thank you so much for being part of Smarter Cities.
It's been great, Jason. Thank you.